Sound Pollution. I want to take a moment to apologize for not having an episode last week, including the monthly music-only episode. I went and got my first dose of the vaccine, made sure my daughter got the vaccine. I had some changes with work, a small reaction, just like, if I would have gotten the flu shot, and it kind of threw my whole week into a bit of a twirl, but we're back. I want to stress that, getting tired or foggy headed after the vaccine is still better than getting COVID, and I can't stress that enough. So don't be selfish. Get the vaccine if you can, if you're able to, if you're well enough to, just do it. It's better than killing somebody's meemaw. I also learned from this experience that I need to have a backup episode all the time so that this doesn't happen again. And again, I really do apologize. This week, I have John P. Funk, and we're going to discuss his music, his inspirations, a new release on his website, and of course, a little advice. So hang tight for that. Let's just go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners of Sound Pollution.
My name's John P. Funk. I'm Enchanted Lands Music.
And what kind of music do you make?
I guess I would call the genre of this particular type of music, I call them soundscapes. On my website, I call it ambient world electronic, and I kind of mix those three main genres. And each one of those genres can be very diverse. I mean, when you think of world music, I mean, that could be anything that includes people from from different parts of the world, or different instruments from parts of the world. Ambient can be Brian Eno. And then the electronic kind of covers. I mean, I love EDM, and I kind of love like old school, like 70s and 80s electronic music. So that's still that's something that's never left me. Even though I left Austin, Texas, that electronic music is kind of still in the heart of what I do and what I like.
What got you interested in that type of music?
The soundscapes or the electronic music?
Both, whichever.
It's interesting. So I'm born in 1965. So I guess I'm kind of an older person for your community of people you may be interviewing.
Oh, no, not at all.
Well, anyways, I grew up in a family of very diverse and eclectic music interests. My dad was into jazz and into the bebop and Coltrane, and he knew Dizzy Gillespie, and that was before I was born. And my mom was a classical musician who played violin. So my parents, that was kind of like a foundation for my music. And then I have three older siblings and a younger sibling, and the three older siblings listen to everything that, imagine, being born in the mid 60s and what you're hearing, like 1, 2, 3, 4 years old. It's like, just imagine, listening to the Beatles when they were a lot, like when they were in their prime, or, Jimi Hendrix or the Doors, or, one of my sisters was really into funk, so I heard Rufus and Shaka Khan when I was like, very young. And then, so I started graduating into the 70s and kind of coming into my own as a child and listening to things. And I discovered, I guess, like, watching movies and hearing soundtracks. And one of the movies I saw when I was pretty young was Logan's Run. And it had all this interesting electronic music in the soundtrack. And that kind of got me, that kind of got me into a phase that would later on kind of shape more things. Jerry Goldsmith has always been kind of one of my favorite go-to composers, next to John Williams. I mean, the two of those together like shaped, music for film. And Jerry Goldsmith was a pioneer in utilizing new sounds and different sounds for his soundtracks. And, I remember seeing the movie Alien when I was a kid and going to the theater and seeing that, and it really creeped me out. But what I liked about it so much was, the art direction was incredible with the H.R. Giger designs and all that. But then the music was just it's just hard to explain the way that Jerry kind of incorporates classical themes, classical nuances from an orchestra, and then the electronic sounds, and kind of bring you into this world. And then what really was a clincher for me was hearing Vangelis in the late 70s. And I mean, when we went to go see Blade Runner in 1982, that pretty much did it. It was like, okay, electronic music is kind of like in me to stay. It's not just the pop thing or what I hear on the radio. It's like film composers are doing stuff with this to make, like a whole other just universe of sound and of music. And from there, it's like, but that's kind of like the end of, well, it's the beginning of the end of the story, for me with the electronic music. Also, listening to Jean-Michel Jarre, Oxygen, that came out in the late 70s, and another band called Tangerine Dream.
Oh, yeah.
And Tangerine Dream ended up doing a lot of soundtracks. They did Risky Business. It was really like the interstitial music, and Risky Business was amazing. The different textures, and Tangerine Dream used to, like, they used to record sounds of the cities and sounds of the trains and airplanes and different things and use them in the background. So I guess they were, early in the idea of looping and sampling and stuff like that. So all that stuff kind of, it all kind of plays into me. It's like looping and sampling and the drum beats. I mean, I could literally talk for hours just for that. So
when did you start writing? When did you start creating it?
Well, I started playing classical flute when I was 11, and then my flute got stolen when our apartment got broken into. And one of the lessons my dad taught me about, about tough love was like, well, you're going to have to buy your next instrument, because if hoodlums are breaking into our apartments and, blah, 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 blah. So I had to wait a year, and then I got electric guitar. The electric guitar brings so many, I don't know, aspects to it. And one of the bands I was really into, the rock band when I was a kid, was Rush. Like, what was so interesting about that band was that they were rockers and they were kind of hardcore, but then they brought synthesizers and electronic stuff. And a lot of people really don't know this, but I think it was like their fourth or fifth album. It's called A Farewell to Kings. They recorded that out in Wales and England, I believe. And some of it was recorded in the countryside. And the guitar player, Alex, was playing classical acoustic guitar, and you could hear it on headphones. You could hear like birds and stuff in the background. And one of the songs on that album, Xanadu, is like a complete soundscape of like nature sounds and synthesizers and guitar. And so when I started playing guitar in the mid 70s, and then my brother took me to see that band on the Hemispheres tour when I was 12, and it was kind of like, wow, these guys are, it's like they're progressive, they're hard rock, they're art rock, and then there's like, soundscapes in their music. And so subliminally or unconsciously, I didn't know that I was kind of moving in that direction. But when I started working in the computer in the mid 90s, kind of take a time warp into the future, I became a computer animator. And
oh, really?
One of the things I had to do was I had to create my own soundtracks for my demo tapes. And so, I'd use 3D Studio and make an animation and try to tell a story with it. And then I would like rip off. I mean, I would go to these sci-fi conventions and buy like the soundtrack scores for all these different movies. And so I would take the soundtrack score from like Vangelis or Tangerine Dream, and then kind of mix it in with my demo reel. So I was editing other people's music with my animations. And then once I became a full like employee at Microsoft, making video games, it was kind of like I was immersed in different teams of people. And on one of the projects I worked on, I was a lead animator, a lead artist, and I had to interface with a lot of the design team and the audio team, and they had people in house like writing their own music, for the game. And I'd go into the studio and like, wow, like these guys, like, I'm an amateur synthesizer player, but I've been playing guitar since I was 13, and it just kind of showed me that even in the 90s. Like, people were producing music on their home computers, like just amateur, musicians creating like really high impact, really meaningful, well-produced music. And so that kind of got me into like, producing my own music. But then, like I said, I had all that legacy from my childhood kind of carrying into, I played guitar off and on in little bands and did little projects, nothing too serious, but I don't know if you've ever been to Austin, Texas, but it is just a music.
I want to really bad.
It's a music crazy city, and it's like growing up there, as a teenager, and then coming back later on, as an adult, and being around all these musicians, and it's just hard to not do it. If you play any instrument, it's like the bug just kind of gets you, and you want to be in bands and you want to be jamming with people. And so I was kind of like a closet electronic musician, but I played guitar and I had my effects and my delays and my reverbs and my choruses and all that stuff. So I was doing kind of electronic soundscapey things on the guitar before I really kind of delved into the synthesizers. So and then plus listening to all that music. So it really kind of gave me a foundation to work with, because any musician out there that plays guitar pretty much knows that you don't have to be a trained classical musician to be a musician.
Right.
Like you could just jump on the instrument, and learn 3 or 4 chords, and then you can be a songwriter. And it's a portable instrument you can carry with you. Whereas a piano, it's stuck in your house. So the interesting thing is like I was developing a vocabulary of music with my guitar playing that would easily transfer into, keyboards and into electronic stuff because my mindset was already in it. If that makes any sense.
No, that totally makes sense. Was there a defining moment, like an aha moment for you, where you were creating and you were like, oh man, this is it. Like I can't do anything else.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I never really took the plunge to be like a full-time musician and I try to make a living at it. And it's very competitive, and I'm kind of picky and a little bit of a perfectionist. So for me to say there was an aha moment, but there were definitely moments where, like, I've also been a writer and an independent filmmaker, and I was developing my own sci-fi show that 18 years into it I had to kind of drop the project, but I started writing another little mini series called Space Adventure, that were these short little cartoons that were kind of aimed towards kids. And if I couldn't finish my full opus like that I'd been working on for a long time, I was going to make these short little movies. And so on top of doing the writing and the producing and everything and the animation, I got to do the scores for them. And I had sold a few scores to some little independent movies and done some, like helping out some folks. And that was fun. But then when I started scoring my own short movies, and this would have been like 2000, I don't know, from like 2006 on. 2011 is what I'm talking about, is when I was working on these short movies. And that kind of got me to the point where it's like, wow, I'm really scoring like the soundtracks to these movies. But the thing is, it's like I want to write and direct them too. It's not like I just want to be the musician, but it came down to the wire where it's like, okay, if I was going to choose one thing and someone was going to pay me to do it on their film, could it be props or visual effects or animation or whatever? It's like, I would probably say, no, I want to produce some music for the movie. And so that was kind of the aha moment. And then when I came to New Mexico, that's where the soundscapes started happening.
So, but you've been doing creative stuff forever. So you just that's just how your brain works out the gate.
Right. And, not to go too much into, like, I was watching, like I said on the email, I was watching your interview with one of your other interviewees, and you guys were talking all about Star Trek, and I was like, man, that's,
Yeah. I'm
like
a dork.
all that sci-fi stuff was like kind of in my blood. And anyone knows anything about, sci-fi movies or shows or whatever, is like the music's got to be game on those shows, because those shows they're creating a visual and an idea that's not of this earth, of some other place.
Yes.
And so you can't drop in conventional music. I mean, they do that now. Like now, it's a different world. But back in the day, like sci-fi shows had, very interesting music and sounds. And like that theme of Star Trek would come on when I was a kid, and I'd be like glued to the TV. Like that was like church in our family. It kind of feels like, my mom's watching the TV with us, and we're watching Star Trek. And there's nothing in that show, like the original one, that's going to cause kids to go out and do nutty stuff, other than like me just getting so inventive and saying, like, I'm going to build a spaceship in my garage out of my dad's old Bell, telephone equipment, which I did. I took a refrigerator box and like built a spaceship when I was about, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years old or something. And,
it's a rite of passage.
Yeah, I guess. But but the sci-fi stuff definitely, it's like the music is, like you hear the theme from Star Trek, and then later on, like when Star Wars comes out, it's like, wow, okay.
Mm.
So that was a real game changer, because John Williams kind of like he broke the trend. Like, okay, other composers were trying to use synthesizers and more kind of modern sounding sounds, and John Williams kind of went back to like Holtz, the planets and things like that, which he actually used some of those themes from other composers, and brought that stuff in. And what was so amazing were like the themes that he wrote, and it's like you can't mistake the Darth Vader theme, like that's
No.
right.
You just know it as soon as you hear it. And I don't think I ever stopped and thought about that, but that is true. They were using different sounds in their scores that nobody had really done before, but I was so caught up in like the visual effects of it, I never ever stopped to think about it. That's so true.
Yeah, the other thing so interesting about Star Wars was that they also invented a new way of creating the sounds for the movies. I believe it's Ben Burtt who was the sound designer. And
Okay.
like the R2D2 had to be a special, sound, and like they use cable wires on telephone poles, and they hit them with the ball peen hammer and record that as like a laser sound. Like
No shit.
Yeah, they got invented. I mean, they found stuff that was like an old ratty air conditioner in a motel that would just made this weird clanking sound, and I believe that George Lucas bought it and like used that for the engine of the Millennium Falcon. I mean, it's like crazy that.
That's insane. I had no idea.
Right, and I mean the thing is like sound effects in those shows back then were like they're revolutionary because no one had ever done that before. And so even though you're not thinking about it, you walk out of the Star Wars, and I saw it opening weekend when I was 12 years old. So I walk out of that movie and I'm going like, what just happened? Like, what, like what happened? It was like I went to church and found religion for the first time, kind of deal. And the other thing I didn't mention was, I guess around 2000, I bought a dedicated guitar synthesizer unit, a Roland. It was a GR33, and I had to install a special pickup on my guitar. And so I was able to do like, kind of Pat Metheny stuff and Robert Fripp's type of stuff, and kind of really go out into like an interesting, world of guitar playing. And then at a certain point, it was like, okay, it kind of seemed cliche to, like mix this sound. It's a prepackaged sound with the guitar sound. And then I started getting more into like, okay, I'm going to buy a dedicated, synthesizer now, and like have that, and not try to do it on the guitar, because the guitar is a great instrument and I love having the guitar synth, but it kind of taught me, it's like, well, there's something about, like learning how to play real keys and having that discipline, which, we're talking about all this, music that, came from the 60s. And, as piano was the main instrument back then, and then the electric guitar, it's like, those were the two main melody instruments in music that we'd hear on the radio. We'd hear guitars or we hear pianos.
Yeah.
And then with the invention of the synthesizer and all that stuff, kind of like, oh, I mean, I don't know if you ever like check out the reverb.com, but they have all these tutorials and like interviews about the, Moog, the inventor of the Moog computer and the ARP 80. And
no, I haven't, but you're not the first person to talk about it, so I should probably do that.
It's just interesting to see the world now. Like people are still really inspired by, I guess you would call it the vintage equipment,
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Like I'm into this, like, oh, the CS80, synthesizer, which was the main one Vangelis used for doing his composing. But, all these other bands, like when the CS80 came out in the late 70s, it was like Yamaha's flagship, synthesizer. And there's like a progressive rock band called UK, which was Alan Holdsworth and Eddie Jobson and John Wetton and Bill Bruford. And it was kind of like a mega band. It's like taking, Yes and King Crimson and like, putting them together with monster guitar player. Like Eddie Jobson played that synthesizer, and there are tracks on that album. And then I think it came out in 78, and my brother played that album, and it took me to another world. And I was like, wow, what is this? what are these sounds, And so when I started getting into my own, music composing, I bought software that like included all these synthesizers. So I didn't have to go out and buy, the analog unit. It's like I have a lot of the samples of those synthesizers on my software that I kind of like, okay, do I want a Roland sound or a Yamaha sound or a Korg sound? Do I want to make a hybrid, of these sound effects? And that's kind of like where the Enchanted Lands music kind of really took off, was saying, oh, I'm going to record nature sounds and I'm going to mix synthesizers with that, throw in a little guitar here and there, and then maybe some native flute, and then find other instruments that I can kind of create, different, a different sonic palette, like as a sound designer,
Mm-hmm.
and as a composer and a sound producer, like wearing all three of those hats and kind of bringing it together.
Let's talk about the first track on that, which is actually entitled Enchanted Lands. What was the inspiration behind that track specifically?
The story is that I left Austin in 2012 to go hang out at my family's house out in the country in Pilar and kind of take a break. And my sister and her partner were going to Wyoming, and they needed like a house sitter. And so, for the first time, I was like ever out in like Taos County in the Rio Grande Gorge. And, I packed up all this equipment in my car, and it's like, I'm gone for the summer. And, my whole life went into a storage shed in Austin. And, I really didn't have like a game plan other than like, I'm going to take a few months. And I wound up in this Earthship house out in the middle of the country, like on, it used to be Indian land. Where,
right.
And then the Rio Grande Gorge and just all this amazing stuff. And so I just got this inspiration to start, producing music. And then I had my computer and all my software with me, and things just started flowing. It's just hard to say. I was like in a vacuum away from the modern world. Like we didn't have internet. We didn't have a cell phone up there. It was a house that they escaped from the world to go and take. And then half the house was under construction. So I stayed in like the part of the house that was kind of unfinished, and that was fine because the room I was in was, like there was nothing wrong with that. It's just I leave the room and there was like, wood and construction tools and all kinds of stuff around. But I kind of like hibernated in this little room and would watch the Milky Way at night, and feels like one of those dark sky locations because you're in the canyon, and even the lights from Taos you really can't even see. And I mean, I was watching the Milky Way, and then, like the first 3 or 4 tracks on that first album of Enchanted Lands was all like, wow, okay, this inspiration that I'm having watching this meteor shower is going to be a song. This inspiration, I'm watching a full moon rise over the canyon is going to be a song. And then like just being in the land of enchantment kind of became a song. And I brought my acoustic guitar, and I'm not a jazz musician, but I love jazz, and I love like the fusion jazz of like the 70s and 80s and 90s, and like Pat Metheny group to me is kind of like the go-to for that type of stuff. I mean, some of their stuff's very like high concept jazz, but some of it is like very almost kind of like soundscapey orchestral thrown in. And so I started making this progression, and it was like very jazzy, kind of bluesy, and I was like, okay, I want this to be in the song. And then I had to write all the keyboard parts for it and produce that. And then once I started getting into that, other things, started happening. I mean, when you start working on your art, the little serendipities and the accidents happen where you didn't plan for this to happen, or you weren't thinking about that, but the things kind of fell into place. And then I was discovering more of my music software and the capabilities of that. And it's like, well, why don't I just do everything I want to do?
Yeah.
I'm not holding anything back. I'm not trying to sell this. It's about me having fun. And then when I started working on that one track, it was like, wow, like this is like I'm recording my guitar and I'm mixing in all this stuff. It's like, this really feels good. It kind of, you kind of get into a high in creativity when you're that focused and that expressive. And I didn't have a name for it. And I'm going like, well, Land of Enchantment, I'm in New Mexico. And it was like, well, Enchanted Lands kind of like I could be anywhere and it could be Enchanted Lands. But there was definitely like an energy to like a lot of that music that kind of felt kind of mysterious and kind of spirited and like other dimensional, otherworldly. So I'm like, I'm just going to go with Enchanted Lands. And so I decided, like, okay, this is going to be the first song on this experimental, volume of soundscapes. It's kind of like if I was going to introduce my music to someone that I've never met and has never heard of me, that would be the song, because it kind of like it carries everything in it. So yeah, I'm really proud of that piece of music. And when I finished that volume and brought it back to Austin when I came back, people were kind of tripping on me. They're like, "Wow, how did you do this? Like, we didn't know you were kind of this kind of musician." I go like, "I didn't either," you know.
Well, that's what happens when you go to somewhere beautiful without outside influence and you've been holding on to that and you're just ready to go. Like the spirit just flowed through you. That's freaking beautiful.
It's good. It's good for your soul to get out into nature and to be
Yes.
creative that way.
Yes.
That, you know, that's why I produced, you know, 6+ volumes of this music, because I would go back to Austin and there'd be like another 250,000 people moving there and the traffic and blah blah blah. And I'd come out to New Mexico and, like, you know, you hear the Serenity song with all the birds, and you know,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, yeah, this is where I want to be spending this time in my life, because I'm kind of done with the high tech thing. And you know, I left the gaming business and kind of said that, well, you know, yeah, it's going to be a challenge to make a living if I'm not doing computer animation, because I spent a good part of my life, you know, developing the skills in that business. But to, you know, to work as a musician and kind of like take these retreats and do what makes me happy. And so if anything, all that Enchanted Lands music for me is like my therapy. It's like, okay, I'm going to do what makes me happy, and I'm going to be
Mhm.
creative. I'm going to treat it as professionally and as a high art as I can. Like,
That's very nice. I really enjoyed it. And I did pick up on like the electronic stuff that you were doing in there and like like some of the samplings is like hear some of the things you were doing and I really enjoyed it. But this one I really liked, Prayer Circle. I loved the drums on that. It was so cool. What's the story behind that one?
yeah, so I guess that was around 2017,
Mm-hmm.
and it was kind of like things were kind of winding down in Pilar where I was living. Things are going through changes, and it was a very interesting kind of. I've been involved with this group in Taos that would have a music jam and a potluck every Sunday,
Oh, that's nice.
and I would go play guitar and jam, and you know, get all kind of, you know, wild with that. And the people are beautiful, and it was, a lot of it was kind of improvisational. It was kind of like the band, you know, kind of like folky, rocky, like not too sophisticated, but a lot of heart.
Yeah.
And and I started really, you know, and I've been a spiritual person, you know, my whole life. So I was going to this place called the Hanuman Temple, that was a Hindu. It's kind of like a hybrid Hindu temple, and you know, and there's like Buddhist temples up in Taos County, and then some friends in Santa Fe that I'd drive down to visit, where they had a kirtan, and they would sing and play music, and it was like their prayer, it was like their church. And so I came in and sat in with them, and I was like, you know, this is beautiful. It's like, there's a certain heart that these people are, or certain frequency of the heart that they're getting into with singing these kind of folky, you know, spiritual songs. And something just hit me. It was like, well, God, you know, this is like the idea for music, like
Mm.
a prayer circle. And I'm going like, okay. So I wrote the lyrics, and then at that music jam in Taos, I had met this young lady, who had a master's degree and was an opera trained singer,
Oh, wow.
and she just moved to Taos, and she was coming to that music jam and singing, and her name's Janae, and she's really lovely. And I'm like, yeah, I'm now writing music for her voice. I wrote 3 songs that would kind of be like the Enchanted Lands kind of hybrid into the singing, you know. I
Yeah.
wrote the songs, the lyrics. She came over and she's like, wow, these are great. And I'm like, okay, we're going to do a performance, and you're going to sing with me. And so the lyrics to Prayer Circle, I didn't put them up on my website,
Hmm.
and we weren't able to record the song because a lot of things changed, as I was mentioning. But that song to me kind of has a very special kind of vibe to it, because the other thing that I really like in the music, and especially not just music I hear, but music I want to play, is like, and so that's Prayer Circle kind of has this feeling of soul. And I didn't record the guitar. And then when I bought this native flute a couple years later that was in the key of D that had a drone, like the flute fit perfectly with that song. And so now
Good.
that song has like 3 variations how it can be performed with guitar and with the singer or with the native flute. And that song, when I listen to it, I just feel like I don't even know how I made it, because I mean, I just don't know where I was. But like having a muse like Janae, come in and hang out with me, and it's like, yeah, here, I wrote the song for you to sing, and she's like, really? And then the way that she sings it with the lyrics, and it's sensual. Like that's the word I would use with the lyrics. It's like when you hear the lyrics and the presentation, it has it's like very Sade, like it has that sensuality to it, and it's kind of like, okay, that's if anything, like where I'm stuck in my music is now I need to write having a singer, and I'm looking for one. But so to answer your question, it's like the prayer circle definitely comes from like a different, it's like it's an enchanted land soundscape with thinking of a singer in mind with these inspirations. And that's the whole thing about my songwriting, is that when I get in that inspirational mode, it just happens. And it happens how it's going to happen. There's not I don't have an agenda.
And now my final and last question before Zoom says no, bye-bye, because it's
Right.
going to do it on its own. And I tell everybody, I ask everybody this question. If you were going to give advice to somebody who is thinking about following their passion and becoming a musician, what would you tell them?
Well, I guess the starting point is that if they're already playing an instrument, or that they need to, find an instrument that they can partner with. Because really, like, if you're writing your music yourself and you're performing it yourself and you're playing an instrument, the instruments that you choose are like your partners. It's almost like a love affair. I know this kind of sounds, cheesy and corny, but
no, it doesn't.
I got my guitar when I was 13, and then when I was 16, I think I got my Pride and Joy, my silver anniversary Stratocaster, and that was my baby for like years and years and years. And the thing is, like, your instrument that you fall in love with is going to go on this journey with you. And to me, that is almost the most important thing, is to cultivate that relationship, practice, experiment, perform, like, get in front of people and play. I mean, the success stories of, any rock or pop or any music that we've heard on the radio has to do with like people getting in front of people and playing and performing with their instrument. And that really, that's what makes a professional musician to me. It's not how well produced their song is their ability to get in front of a group of people and perform and to share that, that love with the instrument. So I would say, if someone wants to be a musician, like, be the musician, like, you could go to music school and learn music theory. That's great. I mean, we all can, use that.
Yeah, we could all benefit.
You could learn the piano. It's like, I'm teaching myself, piano all over again. That's important, but find the instrument that you feel you have that simpatico with. And then also write, like, write your musings down, whether they're just little whimsical, whatever comes to your mind. If you're into poetry and you write that, or if you're into verse, or if you're into like writing short stories, write those ideas down, and then get your guitar or your flute or your keyboard or your drums, whatever, harmonica, you're singing, and then kind of like do the Reese's peanut butter cup, bring the chocolate and the peanut butter together, like have that explosion and see what happens. And the last thing I would say to anyone is, don't let anyone get you down and tell you can't do something. Like, the naysayers will kill you. Like the naysayers out there, like, just ditch those people. Like, you need to surround yourself with people who are supportive. And and no one ever sounds great the first time they do something, and that's okay. It's an experiment. We're learning. The first time a human being walks when we're babies, it's like we fall on our face until we get it right. And so it's really important to develop the confidence in what you're doing and to love it, like, to just really feel like, well, I'm in love with what I'm doing, and that's okay. Like, no one could take that away from me. Like, to be that kind of artist where you can be confident in what you're doing and do it to make yourself happy. And if you do that, you're gonna make other people happy. It's impossible for that to not happen. Well, thank you for having this time. I'll be interested to see how you edit it down into
All right, y'all. I want to thank you for listening to Sound Pollution this week. That was John Funk. Don't forget to drop down into that description section and show him some love. And don't forget, I'll be releasing last month's monthly music-only episode this evening, so stay tuned for that. I did update the website a little bit, so go check that out. It's soundpollutionpodcast.com. If you're not a member of the Patreon, but you're able to be, that link is in the description section. Please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, download, and share this episode. And that's it for this week. Remember to be loved and make some noise.